used to be called gender dysphoria, or gender identity disorder, now they call it gender dysphoria. The idea that sex and gender are malleable.
Hi, this is the third video of a philosophy/politics series I'm putting out on YouTube, and in this video we're going to be talking about who the hell is a liberal really. Now, this begs us to answer another question. What is liberalism in its essence? Well, we hear this term thrown around a lot in media, right? Often with negative connotations. But if you do your philosophical research, take the extra step, you'll find out that the people who frame their enemies as liberals often identify themselves as liberals too, just in a different sense of the word, often tweaked either to the right or to the left. This video will discuss a couple of things. We'll talk about the history of liberalism. We'll talk about different forms of liberalism currently that's going on in political media. And we'll talk about inconsistencies within the liberal school of thought. Okay, so liberalism is often attributed to John Locke. And John Locke was an enlightened philosopher. And it's really important to understand that his ideas developed in relation to monarchy, in relation to feudalism. That's why if you do like a quick Marxist analysis of liberal school of thought, you'll find out that liberal politics was in charge of the zeitgeist during the transaction from the feudal society to the capitalist society. Now that's in feudal society, the power of production, the means of production, are in the hands of the landowners, the nobility, the aristocracy, whereas in capitalism, they're in the hands of the owners of the means of production, or the bourgeoisie. And bourgeoisie are the factory owners. And this all ties down together under the Industrial Revolution. Under the Industrial Revolution, it became more profitable to own a factory as opposed to own huge sums of land and farm on it, right? Marx would have said there is more surplus value in owning a factory than owning a farm. That's why we see a power shift from the nobility to the bourgeoisie. And this is most obviously seen during the French Revolution, where aristocracy was brought down and a class of bourgeoisie came in charge under capitalist principles. So, in a way, liberalism is essentially the political ideology of capitalism. The word liberalism comes from liber in Latin, and that means free. Also, you can also say that it comes from liberty, right? So the core principle of liberalism is the assumption that humans are free and they ought to be free. Free from oppression of a government, free from oppression of one another as well. However, if only there was some consistency within liberal school of thought, we could have just left it there. But there are so many different branches of liberalism, and we're going to talk about that now. Classical liberalism is the one that's often tied to the type of liberalism that's essentially trying to break down the monarchy, the status quo of the pre-enlightened Europe. So classical liberals are obviously Adam Smith and John Locke. They're main two examples. Moving on, we have libertarians. Now, libertarianism is a bit extra because libertarianism loses the pragmatic nature of capitalist ideology, and it focuses on the moral, philosophical, engineering thoughts of liberalism. They say in a purely ideological manner that humans are free, therefore governments are forces of oppression if they act beyond what they're supposed to do. And this obviously links to laissez-faire capitalism, but not essentially. There can be different forms of libertarianism. There you'll find people in online media that identify themselves as socialist libertarians, which itself is a contradictory term, but what's important to understand is that libertarianism is often seen as the very ideological essence of liberalism. Another one is social and modern liberalism. Well, this is interesting. See, now libertarians talk, especially the main philosopher I can highlight as a libertarian, or in his terms, anarcho-capitalist, is Robert Nozick, and this is an American philosopher. I don't know the dates of this guy, but it's late 90s, right? So he developed a philosophy against utilitarian principles, and it revolved around the idea that, humans are free beings and we should be left alone from the government. Here there's an enormous focus on negative rights, and negative rights are the rights that opt for limited government intervention. These are the rights that protect the rights of an individual through limiting the rights of other people intervening in their lives. This is directly in contrast with modern liberals, who argue that there should be not only negative rights, but there should also be positive rights. And positive rights are rights that enable individuals to flourish through intervention, obviously. So they say, modern liberals usually argue that in a capitalist society there is a frame of poverty, frame of inequality that limits the people's rights to flourish, people's capabilities and opportunities to flourish as an individual. And it's, in this sense, it's a lot more developmental. And I think this is what usually the media frames liberalism as, the modern liberalism or the social liberalism. So social liberals generally have a slightly left-leaning view of government intervention. That's right, yeah. And they have a left-leaning view of social rights, meaning that they opt for social rights and social equality. Whereas classical liberalism has a right-leaning understanding of economics, but a left-leaning understanding of social rights. And then there's neoliberalism. This is where it gets really interesting. Neoliberalism is often tied to the term neoconservatism, and these come under the ideology of the new right. The new right philosophers, if you can call them that, are Ben Shapiro, what's the other one? There's two. Jordan Peterson. These people pull the extremes of classical liberalism and argue that the modern development of states, which give rise to equality, which give rise to the social understanding of society, is a derivation of what should have been real liberalism. So they argue for a neo form of liberalism that goes back, ironically, to classical liberalism, but with a twist that supports a right-wing understanding of social justice, right? That's what you see with Jordan Peterson. That's what you see with Ben Shapiro. These people argue that government should not interfere in the economy, right? But they argue that society should be shaped in a way that limits the individual liberty, where it starts interfering with social cohesion. And they, of course, this is all hidden behind a mask of their Judeo-Christian values, right? This political ideology is merely methods in which they forced their religious thoughts into politics. So therefore, there's no surprise that these people are conservatives in the very extreme sense of the word, in the very religious sense of the word. But nevertheless, they're liberals. And they call their enemies liberals in a very, in in a very cringe sense. They're like, ha, liberal cringe. Am I right, guys? But meanwhile, they are more liberal than the liberals that they call out to be liberals. What is really contradictory about liberalism? This is often discussed by post-structuralist school and the postmodern school. It's the general argument that individuals are not a force within themselves, and society exists as a separate notion from the individuals that make up of it, right? So society is something more than a group of people. Society is the group of people plus the interactions that go on between them. And this understanding kind of cracks down the liberal assumption that reality is based upon individual action. Because it says that there's so much that goes on in our lives that we cannot control. And this is a moral philosophy, by the way. Hence, our environment has such enormous impact on our individual behavior that individual behavior and the idea of consent is not reliable sources of mechanisms to shape a political philosophy around. And this obviously is really important because, consent is a good thing, right? But is it really important that we have a consent to starve to death? Is it important that we have a consent to be unemployed? Yeah, I guess you have a freedom to take this job that makes you work from 9 to 5 and you get paid the minimum wage and you can barely feed your family. That's a right. But is that, something to hold up to? Is that something we should strive for as a society? Well, postmoderns and post-structuralists argue no. But then, this is very funny, because they don't argue against capitalism here. Postmoderns do, but most post-structuralists and most left-leaning liberals, they don't argue against capitalism. They argue against the extreme form of capitalism, and they say capitalism is all right. That we can work with it. We can do it something better with it. And they tie back to the very principle they argued against. They tie back to social/modern liberalism. That's why there's this circular line of thought that all revolves around liberalism, and people on the left call the other ones liberals, and people on the right call the other ones liberals, and it's just a mash. It's a stupid clash of political misused vocabulary, essentially. But what we can learn and understand from this debate is that our current zeitgeist, our current norms of our society, always, at least in the West, generally speaking, in America, in Western European countries, it always revolves around liberal assumptions. And I think time will take that away eventually, and it like the world will not dissolve into chaos when liberal assumptions are thrown around. Like, world did not throw itself into chaos when aristocratic assumptions were thrown off. Right? The change will come eventually, but what we have to make sure is that we don't attach ourselves too much to the current assumptions made by our society, and kind of deconstruct our schools of thought and our ways of thinking in an attempt to criticize it, right? That way we can develop faster. Maybe we can develop beyond capitalism. And if not, we can develop beyond liberalism. I think that's it, guys.